Hi everyone,
and welcome to another episode of ITT Podcast, which stands for In This Together Podcast. Our podcast is our honest take on relationships, love, and marriage, with the aim of sharing our views and experiences for you to take from it whatever you need.
So whether you're single, dating, in a relationship, or happily married, there is something in it for you.
Hi everyone, today's episode is called What's Wrong with the Patriarchy? And we'll be talking about what patriarchy is, the history of it, and why it's such an issue today. We're also going to touch on how it can affect relationships and ways in which you can navigate it successfully in your relationship. So let's have a chat.
Let's have a chat.
So, with the rise of feminism, words like misogyny, toxic masculinity, and patriarchy have become more and more frequently used. And not all of us really think about how this can impact our relationships or the impact that it has on our relationship.
That's good.
So we just wanted to kind of break these down and talk about them, and also just address what is wrong with the patriarchy, if anything, right? What is a patriarchy and what is wrong with it?
Discussing this topic is important because recognizing the existence of patriarchy can help clarify views and styles of things related to equality in relationships.
Yeah, that's true. And examining patriarchy can provide a valuable opportunity to reflect on how our own behavior might be reinforcing some oppressive systems of thinking and the effect this can have on our approach and existence within our own relationship. So let's define patriarchy. Patriarchy is essentially a system of society or government in which the father or eldest male is head of the family and descent is reckoned through the male line. No, I don't like that. So
That was written by the village governor.
Okay, so I think a better way to describe patriarchy is simply a system of society or government in which men hold the power and women are largely excluded from it. The dominant ideology of patriarchy, basically.
Yeah.
So it's actually a lot simpler when you think of it in terms of patriarchal being male and matriarchal being female. So society can essentially be patriarchal, so it's like male-led. It can be matriarchal, female-led. Or it could be egalitarian, which is where it's neutral, so it's not led by male or females. I don't know of many egalitarian societies, but I know that there's a number of countries in...
few countries that are working towards achieving, well, not achieving that, but they are working towards egalitarian.
Yeah, so like Nordic countries such as Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark and Iceland are often considered to be closer to an egalitarian society because they've kind of started implementing policies aimed at reducing income inequality and promoting gender equality, which ensure that both men and women have access to education, healthcare and childcare. So they're moving more towards an egalitarian society and probably doing a better job at it than most countries, most Western countries around the world. But there isn't many examples of an egalitarian society, but that is where I think a lot of the ideology is moving to. There's pockets of matriarchal societies around the world. I know that they're not large societies, but there are pockets of groups that are more matriarchal around the world. There are a few which are women-led, but they're not large communities. So just to name a few of them, for example, there's the Bribri in Costa Rica, and the Bribri people are indigenous people of the Talamanca region of Costa Rica, and they live in the mountains and are known for growing most of the produce they need by themselves. They divide themselves into clans and they often follow a matriarchal system. So every child belongs to and is raised by the clan, which is like the extended family of the mother.
Interesting.
So yeah, the status of women there isn't limited to the lineage of her children, unlike many mainstream nations, as per the norms of Bribri. So it's quite a matriarchal society. There's also the Kasi in India, The Khasi people are one of the very few remaining matriarchal communities in India. They are the indigenous tribe of what I can only pronounce as
Meghalaya.
Meghalaya.
Tribe of Meghalaya.
Meghalaya. They are very much a part of mainstream society, even though the children receive their mother's surname. Men play a role in their upbringing, so the married couple doesn't have to live with the bride's parents unless she's the youngest daughter. The men also get a share in the property of his parent, but the bigger share will always be given to his sister.
Wow.
So that's so interesting because it's like a complete flip of what we're used to. There's also, I won't go into detail about these ones, but there's the Mosuo, so Mosuo in China. They're a small community in the Yunnan and Sichuan province of China. Apologies if I pronounced that wrong. There's the
Nagovisi.
New
Guinea.
The Akan in Ghana. They also operate in a more matriarchal society.
Can you just talk a bit more about that? Just said major positions in the financial and political ladder are assigned by looking at the mother's side of the family.
Yeah. Wow. This is the norm behind inheritance and succession is maternal ancestry. The men have an important role in the life of his sister's son, but not his own son. So that's quite interesting. And it's a polygamous society where men are more associated with the female members of his family and women are focused on the management of the entire clan. Wow. Okay. So yeah, that's super interesting. And there's also the Umoja in Kenya. This is as close to the Amazons as you will get. It's one of the newer matriarchal communities in the world. Umoja or Asao is an all-female village founded in 1990. And it started as a home to survivors of abusive marriages and forced marriages. They previously belonged to the Samburu tribe of Kenya, where women are the property of their husbands. But many women faced a lot of atrocities in those tribes. And they were abandoned by their husband or escaped from their misery by coming to Umoja with their children. And so that's the kind of community where men are actually banned from the village. So it's not kind of existing with the women in a matriarchal, under matriarchal leadership, but more so existing as women by themselves. Yeah. So there's many others, but those are probably the most known and the most prominent. So there you have a few examples of matriarchal societies or matriarchal ways of living life. And we all know patriarchal societies is pretty much what most societies around the world run under. So there has been a lot of talk about patriarchy, the negative impact it has on women and men and our societies in general. There's a lot of talk these days about toxic masculinity, about kind of dismantling the patriarchy as well, you might have heard people talking about, and the word misogyny being thrown around to kind of as icing on the cake, the cherry on top. So we're just going to talk about that a bit and just kind of link it to relationships and what we think about the impact it can have and everything else. First of all, Frank, what have you always kind of understood patriarchy to be?
So a society where the men have all the power and the women are just second-class citizens, really. Yeah, that's how I've always understood it.
Okay.
But I've only experienced it when I started working.
That's interesting, though, because you grew up in the patriarchal society. Yeah. You're Nigerian. You grew up in Nigeria. You came here quite young. Came to the UK quite young. But you had a number of years in Nigeria, and you still have a very strong Nigerian culture around you. So did you not see that as patriarchy?
I guess when I was younger, it's not something that I thought about or tried to figure out. When I look back at my childhood now, I can definitely say for sure that's what was happening. The whole everything goes to the boy.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if the boy is the fifth child of the family. He still gets to inherit, the family's properties or whatever.
Yeah.
If the father passes away. So everything just leaned towards men in Nigeria, and it still does. I didn't feel it going through the school system. Yeah. I guess I probably wasn't looking out for it.
But you did go to a boys' school as well.
That is true. I did. That's a good point. That's a good point. But when I went to college, so I didn't experience that in college. Even at university, I didn't experience that either.
You didn't feel like you were in patriarchal world.
At uni felt very like whoever was pulling their weight were getting their work done in a good grade.
So it felt quite equal.
It felt quite equal when I was at uni, but it's when I got into the working environment that's when I saw it for myself.
So what would you say you saw? What made you think, oh my God, this world is run by men?
Yeah, I can see. Just it's clear. You can see the leadership team. 95% or even 98% were men. The management team were just all men. The female in the group would be probably someone junior level, probably there for administrative purposes. That person was part of the management team for specific reason, but all the actual decisions would be taken by men. For me, I don't look at the sex when it comes to leadership. I look at the qualities that the person is displaying. If it's someone that can bring the team along, I don't really care if it's a female or a male. To me, it's how they go about, exerting their leadership.
And then maybe it's just like, it just so happens that you've had really good... because I'm sure there's really good male leaders, but I do appreciate that there's probably a different energy in how women lead naturally versus how men lead naturally.
Yeah.
In the grand scheme of things, or if you think of all male leaders combined versus all female leaders combined,
but also, I think there might be a reason why that's the case in terms of what I've experienced. Maybe they felt like they had a lot to prove, so they themselves may have experienced different type of leadership, so they wanted to do something different.
Yeah.
So
it's possible.
Yeah, their approach was slightly different. So it's like, they had changed up the ways of how they did their leadership. That could just be the case.
That's how you were. That's when you kind of started to really understand patriarchy.
Patriarchy, yeah. Yeah, and then when you look at sports, realize that, wow, okay, it's a patriarchy. Well, like it's controlled by like men. What about you? Like,
I never had a word for it, like patriarchy. Obviously, getting older and reading and understanding a lot more, I'm a bit more clear on the fact that it's actually called a patriarchy. But I was very aware of patriarchy and the patriarchal systems we exist under from when I was young. And, I often say I grew up around men and grew up with a lot of uncles, a lot of male cousins, and, I had a lot of female aunties as well, but, I always felt the dominant presence of the men in my life growing up. Maybe because my dad was quite a strict, dominant father. So he was very, masculine, man's man type of father. So I always felt the patriarchy. I always felt the fact that as a woman, I was not the leader. I was not kind of men had the number one position and women had the number two position. And that's kind of how it always was. And I didn't think it was a bad thing, but I did feel that it was a bit unfair. Yeah. But I didn't feel like it was a bad thing. I felt like the way some men took on that position and what they did with that position rubbed me the wrong way, and I didn't like the way they kind of handled themselves. And so I think that's what I didn't like about the patriarchy. But I would say I understood that we lived in a male-dominated world where men had all the power from when I was young, and maybe because I'm a girl, it was quite clear to me from when I was young. So that's what patriarchy always meant to me. Men number one, women number two. Men dominate. And not necessarily a bad thing, but I was very aware that, I had my own autonomy and I had my own thoughts and feelings, and that wasn't always recognized. Yeah. But I wouldn't say I felt held back in any way. I would just like to emphasize that my dad was very encouraging of me being very independent and intelligent and, self-reliant and self-efficient. So my dad he didn't kind of stifle me, but it was very contradictory in the sense that it was almost like he wanted me to be the best woman I could be, but to know my place. So it was interesting in that sense. But yeah.
So, there are people out there that would say, okay, where does this patriarchy come from?
Yeah.
Like, is it something that has always been there? Is it something that has always been in society, or is it something that is a new thing?
Yeah, so how did we get sucked into a patriarchal system? Especially considering that there are societies in our world that don't operate in a patriarchal system. So that is interesting. Well, we did a bit of research into this, and there were a few articles and videos that we watched on YouTube, and some articles that we read that were quite compelling and interesting in laying it out. I think the most compelling one was a YouTube video by the Girl Child and Her Long Walk to Freedom. That's literally the title. The Girl Child and Her Long Walk to Freedom. And that really kind of broke it down really well, I think. So if you ever want to look that up and do your own research about it. But to summarize, we were all more equal in the beginning. So if we think of ourselves playing different roles, hunter, gatherer roles, and this kind of goes back to things we've spoken about in the past, like the way we had our roles split in terms of the gatherers, be it the nurturers, be it the looking after the clan or the community, and the hunters are the ones that kind of go out and get the food and get these done.
Yeah, that's true.
But then we started owning land and properties, and that shifted to a sense of ownership within men.
Yeah.
And from there, the need to protect what you owned kind of became very prevalent, and men would be kind of the ones to protect what they owned. So their land, their family, the men were the ones kind of probably down to physicality and biology, right?
Yeah.
Men are stronger overall, so they were probably the ones fighting to protect what they owned. But then this kind of took a wrong turn when it made women...
I guess women were then grouped into those things that needed to be protected.
Yeah.
And it's kind of protecting the property.
Yeah.
Protecting the land, protecting the woman.
Yeah. Protecting the children. And then women and children becoming viewed as property, as ownership, and because of that, it brought favor onto the boy children. Because obviously the boy children will grow up and become men who will have their own women and their own land and their own children. So if that's kind of how the patriarchy started, and from there, inheritance was being given to the male children to keep it in the family and protect what is owned through the lineage and the generations. The lineage goes through men biologically because the children came from the same man. So the notion there was that the man would essentially impregnate women or different women or one woman, and from there, each child that he produces is his child because that child comes from him. Whereas a woman can be impregnated by many different men, but she will not necessarily produce children that are part of her lineage. If we think of the fact that we take our father's names, for example, when a child is born, the lineage they belongs to is their father's lineage. And even women, when they're born, the name they carry is their father's name until they get married, if they choose to take on their their husband's name or not. I mean, we had a discussion about, but does that have to be that way? Can a woman not carry on her own father's name, or can they not double barrel the name? But then
some people do.
Which some people do. But then when we thought about it, we were like, but if everybody double barreled their name, where would that lead us? Because then you'll have, Jones Smith married to, I don't know, White Harrison, because a double-barreled boy is married a double-barreled girl. What do they become? Jones Smith, White Harrison, and then...
Triple barrel.
And then if that person marries another, it wouldn't actually work if you really do think of it in terms of double-barreling and things like that. So they have to pick a name. I mean, maybe we could be in a world where people just pick their own names, but then the lineage then is lost because there's no connection to your past. And I think it is either you take the female name or you take the male name or you pick your own name. But to connect you to your past, you have to pick a name from the past. So I think what happened with this whole women and men becoming owners and men becoming like the property owners and women becoming more like property is that the name chosen to be carried became the man. And from there, it's just basically how the patriarchy just continued. Men being the one in power to make decision, and that's took us to where we are today. But yeah, so that's a bit of a background on how traditionally we got into that patriarchal space. Another thing to consider as well when you're speaking about the origins of patriarchy, you know, the majority of people around the world belong to a religion, or you know, with Christians, Muslims, Jews. There's just so many different religions that have the same, you know, creation story, which is essentially that everybody knows anyway. I don't know why. I don't need to give people a proper backstory, but that the woman came from man, created after man. The woman is like companion for the man. So in all of that, there is that notion that the man's position is designated at the stage of creation. So
that's a really good point.
Yeah, so the you know, we can look at it in terms of hunter-gatherers, and we can look at it in terms of how we kind of the logical aspect of patriarchy, in the sense that the men were probably more suited to protect and you know, protect what's owned, and then women becoming more seen as more like ownership, which is still very, very relevant even with the creation story in mind, because you know, even when you think of the Bible or the Quran or other holy books, they still do talk of men and women existing in more of a union and existing in almost like a partnership and in that mutual respect. So where did we become this kind of oppressive version of that? Could actually, it's still relevant that is probably how it came about, with this whole ownership notion, with women becoming like property. But I do think it's worth mentioning that there is still the argument that patriarchy, or the man's position of power, is not necessarily something that we became, but something that we always were. This system is something that was there from the beginning of time. So there is that as well.
Yeah.
I wonder if anybody else has a different view of it, but I think pretty much that's pretty much the summary of them. So, I mean, in terms of relationship, we've given a lot of backstory on definitions and things like that.
So in a relationship, is patriarchy bad? Is it a bad
So
thing?
upholding patriarchy in a relationship, is that actually bad? What do you think? What do you think, Frank?
I don't think it's bad in the relationship, because obviously there needs to be one leader, right?
Some people would say there needs to be two leaders. There can be two leaders.
There can be two leaders, but you're leading in different areas. That's how I see it. Like,
if there's two.
If there's two leaders, okay, the nurturing of the home, like, you're the leader of that, right? I would say, right? Protecting of the home, I'm the leader of that. Does that make sense? So you can have two leaders, but if we want to be honest, the leader of the family is the man. You can say, okay, but why does that have to be the case? Because we've seen that there are matriarchal societies and they're thriving, so it works.
Well, we don't know if they're thriving.
Well,
but they still
exist, so I would assume that they are thriving. So it's something that I thought about many times, and I don't want to sound like misogynistic and say
that word.
You know, that's another word that I keep hearing all the time, and it's almost like it's hard to express your views without coming across as misogynist.
Yeah, I mean, let's break down misogyny. What is the difference between misogyny and patriarchy?
Okay, let's do that first then.
Yeah, because misogyny basically refers to a hatred of or strong dislike of women. So misogyny refers to a deep-seated hatred, prejudice, or contempt towards women or girls based solely on their gender. It also involves a range of beliefs, attitudes, and behaviours that denigrate, marginalize, or discriminate against women. It can manifest in many different forms, including verbal abuse, objectification, discrimination, violence, and system biases. And it's rooted in a societal, cultural, and historical factor that perpetuates kind of harmful gender stereotypes and unequal power dynamics between men and women. So misogyny is much more about the feeling towards women, which is linked to hatred or strongly disliking women, whereas patriarchy is just the system or the structure of society being male dominated.
So why are they always so linked together? Why
Because
do they get used so often?
Because I guess the structure of society being male dominated means that a lot more men can kind of hide behind the system and kind of be misogynistic, because society almost backs it by being male dominated, and a lot of that kind of stuff can go unchecked. But that's why you struggle to say, you don't necessarily disagree with patriarchal structure, because it can sound misogynistic, but you are not a misogynist, because you don't hate women and you don't have, these stereotypical kind of oppressive and sexist views about women. You just have your view on what you think about, the system of patriarchy in a relationship.
Okay. Yeah. So going back to the question then of, is patriarchy bad in the relationship? I don't think it's bad in the relationship. I think if the leadership is strong and there's trust in the relationship, I don't see any problem with it. It's when if the leadership is weak, it becomes a bad idea. I mean, we've spoken about roles and responsibilities in previous podcasts, and it's like we've all got a role to play in a relationship. Yeah, that's my view. How about you?
I agree with you. So I don't think the patriarchal system is any more wrong than the matriarchal system. I think, like you're saying, it's about how that leadership is acted out. I really don't believe in dual leadership. So I believe in leadership within roles, right? So I believe in roles. And I think if that's your role, you're leading, because that's your role. On that stuff, you're the expert. Yeah. But I still feel like there needs to be an overarching leader. And I think, there's a lot of people that would maybe disagree with me and be like, we could just lead together. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's something about the way I view the world. I feel like it's clearer when there is an overarching leader, when there is someone who is the leader. Because even at work, like I said before, we all have our roles, we all lead on stuff. But there is still that person that is expected to be the leader.
Someone to take the responsibility.
Yeah. And I think there's nothing... Yeah, I think there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's only a problem when that leader abuses their power.
Yeah.
And leadership is power. So you can abuse your power. And I think that's where the problem is. And I think that's where patriarchy and misogyny gets meshed up.
Yeah.
And the word patriarchy becomes like a dirty word that nobody wants to live under patriarchy, because it's almost like it's a given that there's going to be an abuse of power.
Yeah.
Society-wise, I'm very much supportive of society being more egalitarian, because I feel like in the workplace, it makes sense for everybody to be more equal.
Yeah.
Even with clear leaders, I still think, the way leaders are appointed and all that kind of stuff, it should all be very clear and equal. But I think in the home, I think in the family dynamic, I don't think there's anything wrong with patriarchy per se. I feel like it's either going to be a matriarch or a patriarch, in my opinion. And I think it's okay to be a patriarch, because I feel like there's a lot of reasons why men can make natural leaders, in the sense that, they have a lot of biological qualities that make them good natural leaders. Overall, not every single man. Collectively, I would say.
Yeah.
But I think there needs to be a leader, in summary. And I feel like people work better when there are leaders. The captain.
One person accountable.
Yeah. Captain, the manager, it's good. But not being the leader doesn't make you any less important, in my opinion.
That's really good point. That's a really good point.
Yeah, I don't think they are any less important, and I don't feel like you should feel like you don't have a say or feel unheard or anything like that. I think you're very vulnerable.
Good question. But in our relationship, do you feel like you lead on anything? Because we talk about roles and responsibilities. We've spoken about this in the past before, where we talk about, I'm responsible for certain things, you're responsible for other things. Those things that you're responsible for, do you feel like you own those things, you need those things?
Yeah. On those things. Yeah. I feel more like they're my role and I lead in those things. So, for example, doing with the administrative side of our finances, I lead on that. I decide how we're going to do it, what's what the spreadsheets are going to look like, what the breakdown is financially and stuff. But I still feel like I'm still under your leadership, even though that's weird, because it's like, well, why would I still feel like I'm under your leadership dealing with finances in our marriage and our household? And the reason is because I still feel like you are still the leader. So you still have the kind of final say on financial things. I still feel that way.
Yeah.
So even though I will do certain things, or I can manage our finances and we can decide on things together, I still feel like I trust you enough. I trust your judgment enough to feel comfortable knowing that at the end of the day, if push comes to shove, Frank will take the best financial decision for us because he's the leader.
But in order to do that, I will need to speak to you about the finances and where we are, what's happening with it. So your leadership in that provides me with the information that I need to make a decision.
And that's why I was saying you are not less important. If anything, you're just as important as the leader. Because without my management, we wouldn't be in the position for you to take financial decisions I feel like my role is absolutely crucial. But it's not more important than your role, and your role is not more important than my role. But your role just happens to be the leader role. So if you want to kind of check where we are on things, and there's something you're thinking about and you want to make a decision on, and you want to bring it to me and be like, listen, what's going on with this, what's going on with that? Most of the time anyway, because you have the shared drive, you've got the documents, you can see everything I'm doing. It's not like I do it in secret and be like, sign here. So it's like everything that's going on. But I do feel like you have that position where at the end of the day, you're going to kind of decide which directions we take on our finances.
Okay.
And I trust it.
So the knowing about countries that are working towards an egalitarian society, do you think relationships will benefit from that? Sorry, this might be
no, it's cool.
From what we were discussing.
I think relationships benefit so much from that because it allows relationships to operate in the way they choose to operate. So I'm very much about society being equal. I'm not really about a patriarchal society. I know that sounds a bit messed up, because it's like, but if all the men are the leaders in their houses, they're going to go out there and be leaders in the real world. But I'm like, no, not really, because to me, you're the leader in your household because that's your family. But women also have the right to work, and they still have the right to make certain decisions. And if they're in the workforce, they should be offered the same equal rights and opportunities and everything else. And if you happen to be a female leader or you happen to be a male leader, there should be no difference.
I agree.
Because society should be equal. How that reflects in your household, I think, is a matter of choice. You might be a matriarchal household.
True. Which some relationships are.
Yeah. Some of them are egalitarian. 50-50, 100% split down the line. You bring your contribution, I'll bring mine. You can't make no decision without me signing off on it. I can't make it. But I don't like those kind of relationships, if I'm honest with you, because it's not like I don't like those kind of relationships, but I don't subscribe to that, because I feel like if you are too 50-50, 100% equal, which we are equal as human beings. So when I say 100% equal, I mean there is no clear leader. I feel like you could easily get to a point where you both have very strong opposing views and nobody's willing to bend, and the relationship falls apart because of it. Whereas because I always feel like you're the leader, I'm always ready to bend where I think I need to. Sometimes I feel strongly about something and I will keep harping on about it.
But would you call it bending when you needed to? Would you use? I think that word is a bit too strong. Bending.
Do you think it's strong?
Yeah, I think it's.
So
strong.
What do you think I'm doing?
It's kind of like you agreeing. Yeah, I wouldn't call it bending, because there are things you have strong views on, but we do come to. I said this before in previous discussions. We do sit down, have several discussions about that specific thing several times, then come to an agreement.
Yeah, it's
never just a case of, well, I don't agree. Well, it's your decision, so you go ahead and make that decision. It's never like that, because when that has happened in the past, I've often felt bad about it. So it feels like, okay, if I make this decision, it's part of it is you. It's not coming from you.
Yeah.
You're not going to be, at least 80% or 70% happy with it. So I will sit down with you, we'll discuss a bit further. They would then come to an amicable agreement, even though I still take the decision, but it's something that I would try to make you understand my views, put it that way. I try to explain to you why I believe that this approach is the best way.
But that's why I think you're a good leader. That's what I'm trying to say. Because if I'm not entirely happy and that doesn't sit well with you and you do your best to try and help me understand where you're coming from, to me, that's why I can trust your leadership, and I'm much happier following your leadership, because you're not just going to, well, I don't care that you don't like what I'm saying. Yeah. This is what we're doing. To me, that will make you a bad leader. That's what we were talking about the other day about submission. That's the submissive relationship. And that's not how we operate. We operate more under leadership. I mean, at the end of the day, you still, to me, because I trust your judgment, have the final say. Even if I'm not entirely happy with it, I trust it. There's a lot of things, I mean, we probably don't want to go into it on this podcast, but there's a lot of things that you've made a decision on that I don't agree with.
Give an example. Say one thing. I need to know. I don't think I know what you're on about, but just give an example. Don't need to be shy.
Okay, well, I'll give an example. We'll see how we feel about this when we play this back.
Yeah.
But for example, I've always felt like we should be in our final home already, right?
Yeah.
Final home wise.
Yeah.
When we first moved into this, which is our second home, I didn't want to move again. My view was, no, we move one time and we don't move again. So I wanted things to be literally final home-esque, right? And I'm not going to go into detail about what that is. But your view was like, it's no big deal to move again if we have to move one more time. I didn't agree with that, but I trusted your judgment on it.
But I gave some points of
you gave some compelling reasons.
Yeah, that's why you agreed to.
Yeah, but it's not my view, right? If you get that, and that's what I'm trying to say. I still recognize that I trust your judgment a bit more than my own judgment on certain things, because I feel like you're a good leader and you think about things from a different perspective.
I know, but I did say to you when women had that discussion that, look, we will move again.
Exactly, but I didn't want to move again.
But that's what
I'm trying to say. It's the moving again that I didn't agree with.
No, but
I was willing to.
Yeah, you were willing to, but I did put some points across in terms of the benefits of moving
100%.
And where we're currently living, the value of the house will appreciate much quicker in time than support moving into a much bigger house afterwards.
Yeah.
Which you agreed with.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
I did get your buy-in at the end, did I know?
You absolutely got my buy-in.
Okay, but you did not agree at first because you wanted to move just one time.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So that's an example that I can give. But I do not sit here feeling like, oh, he's made a crappy decision. No way, I don't feel like that, because I trust that decision and I trust your judgment.
Yeah.
And I think it was a good decision. Even now, as we've been in our home for 4 years now, going on 5.
Yeah.
I feel like it was a good decision, and it could have happened my way, and I don't think it would have been catastrophic, but I think it was a fair decision.
So what we're saying is patriarchy isn't bad in a relationship.
Not in my view, no.
So you think you can live in an egalitarian society, but within our relationships and our family structure, we can still have that patriarchy structure?
I think we can. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Choose to.
I think it's more about choice. I say a patriarchy in a family is better than a matriarchy. I personally feel that way, because I feel like naturally there's certain gender roles.
This also goes back to the whole, remember our early podcast about who is the prize?
No.
The women are the prize. Then you've got to protect.
Yeah, that's why for me, a patriarchy makes sense in a family, in a household, in a relationship. Because I feel like women are the prize. I feel like women should be protected by men. I feel like there are certain roles a man should play. Like financially, I think if anybody was going to provide for anybody financially, it should be the man. So I have certain traditional views, like I'm always saying.
But I think a lot more women will have that views if men were not abusing the power that comes with the patriarchy structure.
Yeah.
Even in a relationship.
Yeah.
That's the only reason I think a lot of men will push back on it is the abuse of
It's
power.
abuse, but this is what I was saying. I think even in society, the link between misogyny, abuse of power, and patriarchy is becoming synonymous. People are thinking of patriarchy as being an oppressive system because a lot of men have used it in an oppressive way. Whereas I don't think there's anything wrong with the patriarchy. So the title, what is wrong with patriarchy? I don't think there's anything wrong with patriarchy, anything more than there's anything wrong with matriarchy. Like I said, but I think what is wrong with patriarchy in our society is abuse of power, and it's the imbalance. So that's why I do think as a society we should be egalitarian in terms of our laws, our politics, our, the workforce, the way we are. But I think we should allow people the freedom to behave in the gender roles in their household and their marriages without scolding them for being, traditional and old-fashioned. No, because I feel like leadership matters. And who's going to lead is quite important. And I feel like if you make the wrong decision on who or how you lead, then, the whole thing could fall apart. And I think things work better under a patriarch because I feel like women are, they are the ones that should be protected by their husbands and their family. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I just don't think it should be, it should mean that women are any less than men.
Or women, they don't have the freedom to be whoever they want
to be. Or do who they want to be. Exactly. Yeah, that's how I feel about it. So, do you like my point?
Yeah, I love it. I love it. So really, it was solid forward.
But what's your point? You did say a similar thing when you said you don't think patriarchy is bad. Is that what you meant as well?
Yeah, that's what I meant. I don't think it's bad, but I think what I was trying to say earlier on, there's nothing wrong with it. But when men start abusing the power and stuff, it becomes a big problem. That's when I hate it.
Yeah.
I agree the man should be the leader of the house. But if he has the wrong leadership qualities and stuff, then that's a big problem. That's the reason I will question if the whole patriarchy thing is right. I believe that should be the system.
But are we even able? Are we able to have a patriarchal system? Without it being abused by men. That's why I'm all about choice in a relationship in terms of do what works for your relationship. I feel like you should be able to be in a patriarchal relationship where as a woman you're protected and your husband is able to make sound decisions and you trust his judgment. To me, I feel like that's what you should want as a woman. Because I feel like women are, we're delicate. We're the prize in that way, right? So I feel like you should. But I feel like if you don't have that kind of husband, you have the right to not be forced to rely on him or lean on him or you have the right to get yourself out of that relationship like the women in the tribe in Kenya did. I mean the Umoja women in Kenya. So I feel like you shouldn't be seen as second-class citizens in society. But
that leads on to why is patriarchy such a problem in today's society? I guess we've already touched on one of them, the abuse of power. It harms both men and women. From a man's
different ways.
From a man's perspective, it doesn't allow men to be vulnerable. It doesn't allow men to be themselves. You almost have to be a certain way to fit in. Even if you have different leadership approaches, you could come to an organization where you can change your leadership because you see other men and be in a certain way. You almost fall in line and become. I've seen it happen. In workplaces. You fall in line and become that way. You almost lose yourself. So I think it's quite damaging.
Yeah, I mean, one of the videos that we watched on YouTube talked about the 5 ways the patriarchy affects men in their relationships. And we noted it down because we thought it was so interesting. So like masculinity versus masculinities. So he was talking about, the fact that there's such a rigid, prescribed view of what being masculine is. And that masculinity kind of was shadowing, tendencies to be masculine or things about you that are masculine that may not necessarily fit with that stereotype. So masculinity becoming an overpowering thing that you keep trying to perform, as opposed to being, aspects of you that come naturally. Yeah.
It's true. Yeah, I think the second one is an emotional range of 2.
Yeah.
Anger or silence.
Yeah. And I've even talked about that about you in the past. Like your one was definitely silence.
Yeah.
Men can often just relate emotionally either through anger or silence. And it's that kind of, I'm upset about something, so I'll be angry about it, or I'll be quiet and silent about it. And your one was definitely silence. I would say my dad was probably more anger. I grew up under anger, whereas you grew up kind of man that was completely opposite to my father in that sense. You were much more silence. But not silence in, I'm not going to say nothing, but silence as in, I'm going to...
Silence of the lamb.
Silence as in...
I'm not going to talk to you.
I'm not going to talk to you, which is just as harmful.
Yeah.
Which you know now anyway.
Yeah.
But it's just as harmful, and it can be very detrimental to a relationship. He also spoke about it being harmful to men in terms of an accountability-free relationship. That he felt that a lot of men have accountability-free relationships. They don't necessarily always have to take accountability for their actions or...
True.
I think this is where he's talking about, like, boys will be boys, cheating.
Yeah.
Oh, all men cheat.
You know how men are.
Yeah. Not always having to take responsibility for their actions and gaslighting you, be like, oh, you're just insecure. Oh, I thought we got over that already. You're still bringing it up. Things like that. And that can be harmful to men in the sense that they're not having kind of effective relationships. Yeah. Because if you can't take accountability, then you can't learn from your mistakes, which means you can't grow. And if you can't grow in a relationship, then you can't really prosper. Yeah, it can't really be a success. What was the other one he was talking about?
Invisible societal privilege. This one was interesting.
Yeah. It's kind of like what you were saying about, at work, all these privileges that men have that they kind of take for granted because they're just used to it being that way.
It's the norm.
Yeah.
It's just normal.
Yeah. It also affects men in terms of their relationship with other men. That was the last one he was talking about. Most men, not kind of, and I guess it's linked to that performance of masculinity, wanting to be a man's man, in their vulnerable relationship that they could build with their male friends. It doesn't always happen because you don't want to seem too soft, or you don't want to, come across as weak.
Yeah.
Statistically, that leads to most men being isolated, and it's recognized that men have the highest rates of suicide across the world. We recognize that women are the most likely to be victims of homicide and killed by men. In terms of, if you're looking at in terms of the sexes, men kill women more than women kill men, and that's there's lots of reasons why that is that you can think of at the top of your head. But in terms of suicide, men are more likely to kill themselves than women. And some of this could be due to the isolation and the pressures of the world and all of that. So, his whole point, the radical therapist on YouTube, was that patriarchy harms both men and women, like we said, but also that it affects men and their relationships in a number of ways that is not always recognized.
And I think check it out.
Yeah, and I think that is interesting. And, when we think about why is patriarchy such a problem today, I would say as well, as a woman, it's a problem today because of the rise of feminism as well, which is not a bad thing, but it is something that has affected the way we view patriarchy, like we were saying about misogyny and everything else. Because the feminist movement is about equality, a society that's run under patriarchy is just not going to fly. It's not going to be acceptable. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I think that we do need to tread carefully with that, because men are very much a part of society as women are. So it's like, how do we dismantle, I use that word very loosely, the patriarchal system that we live in society-wise? And I'm not talking about relationships, families and homes. I'm talking about society and the way women and men are viewed. How do we make that more equal without isolating men and without kind of making men then take the place that women were occupying, why we got to this point in the first place? So basically, we're not trying to get to a matriarchal society, are we? So how do you do that? How do you dismantle patriarchy without switching straight to a matriarchal society? Because that's not what we're saying we want.
Yeah. Another problem patriarchy into this society is people such as Andrew Tate. Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah.
That name is like
People like
the
that.
forbidden name.
Yeah,
Don't
well,
mention the
I'm gonna
Mr.
say,
Tate.
I'm gonna say it. People like that just they don't help the cause. They just make things worse.
Why do you think people like Andrew Tate make things worse as a man?
Because of what is being taught to the young men out there. That energy, it feels very negative. Feels like, so he's literally telling young men out there that yes, you are the most important sex in society. Own it. That's exactly what he's saying. That's the message. That's all I get from it.
You are the most important.
You are the most important sex. You know, you're the desired one. You're the prize. So all that energy, that's what I get from that.
So you think that affects relationships in a negative way?
Oh yes, I think it does, because young men will come into a relationship believing that
that they're the more important.
you know, and they miss the whole point of being in a relationship.
Yeah.
So it's a big problem.
Yeah. And I think my problem with the Tate message is that it doesn't feel like it is effective leadership, because it leans more towards the submissive relationships than what I think relationships need to be, which is a partnership and leadership in that partnership. Yeah, so I feel like it's nothing wrong with telling men to own their masculinity. And, you know, we say it in a way because we talk about men being leaders and men protecting. And I feel there is an innateness to that. And I think that there's nothing wrong with that. I feel like that's right to some extent, right? But I still feel like that should come with appreciation for women. It should come with an understanding of what women bring to society and the key role they play and how equal we all are at the core of it, which I think is what the message that he's sending misses. It has elements of what I think are true, which is, you know, nobody owes you anything. Stand up and go and get it. Make something of yourself. You're a leader. Be a leader. Be a man. You know, there's elements of that is good, but it is also toxic to men and women in that it can breed egotistical, almost authoritarian type of leaders who are not compassionate, who are not understanding, who do not appreciate the level of contribution that women make to society and in relationships. So yeah, I think we're on the same page about that. The Tate thing.
His leadership, it makes me laugh because sometimes it feels like, you know, when you're in the workplace, the boss is not around.
Yeah.
You have one of the other guys that thinks he should be next in line. And then he gets up and he's like, right, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do it right. So I'm just like, what? Like, what are you talking about, mate? So he wants to be that leader, but he's doing a very bad job of it. I mean, like you said, there are some, when I've heard him talk, he's got so much energy that if he said the right things, the impact, imagine the impact on young men out there.
Yeah.
It will be extremely beneficial to these people, like to the young men, because he's got so much energy. He's well spoken and everything. So he's got the qualities, but what he says and the way he delivers,
what he's delivering is not.
It's just
not it.
It's not it.
Yeah.
Gibberish.
Yeah. I mean, and even when we talk about feminism is just about the equality of both sexes. You know, recognizing the autonomy that women have over themselves as a human right.
Yeah.
And respecting that autonomy and that and trying to do what you can to make sure that things are more equal. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think everybody should be a feminist in that sense, right? I think Chimamanda said that, you know, everyone should be a feminist. It's true. Why would you not want equality? Why would you not want women's autonomy to be, you know, respected and recognized? Women are human beings the same way men are. You know, we should respect each other's autonomy and that. But I don't think that takes away from roles if you want to perform roles, if you want to live under a certain structure, a certain leadership. And so that's where what Tate is saying is not necessarily wrong, but there is a level of equality that needs to be injected into that for it to actually function effectively and for it to be productive and not oppressive. So that's kind of what's wrong with it, right? You should choose how you run your relationship. despite being a feminist. That's what I believe is true equality, right? Yeah. So I guess what we're saying is the problem with the patriarchy is essentially
The abuse of power.
Yeah, it's abuse of power, and it is a society that is running in a patriarchal way as well. When it doesn't need to. Society could be more equal, and it should be. So what steps can we take as individuals to address some of the problems with the patriarchy, especially in our relationships, and to kind of not fall victim to them in our relationships?
I think as a man, I would say be vulnerable. Expand your emotional range.
Yeah.
Be more vocal. Like, you know, if you're in a relationship, be vulnerable with your partner.
Yeah. And
communicate with your partner.
Yeah, and be more compassionate and understanding. And those are not traits that are very synonymous with masculinity, but they're very important for good leadership. They're very important for partnerships.
And it starts with us. It starts with the men in terms of, like, you know, what steps to address some of the problems. You know, if we're going to start making headway in terms of like improving the whole situation, it needs to start with us, men.
Because I guess you hold the power.
We hold the power, exactly. You know, we hold the power, so we need to support equality. It's up to us to turn it around.
Yeah,
I would say we need to demonstrate different forms of masculinity. Be different. Be your own person.
Yeah, and be courageous enough to be different. Yeah. I mean, I also think women should speak up more, even if they're not speaking that feminist language per se. So I feel like feminism at its core is about equality of the sexes, but what it looks like to be a feminist is very blurred. You know, you have some feminists that would say, you know, strippers, for example, you can't be a feminist and be a stripper because you're exploiting your sexuality, you're being hypersexualized, you're kind of appeasing men and stuff like that, so you're not a true feminist. And then there are some feminists that's like, well, it's all about autonomy and what you want to do with your body and yourself. So if you choose to be a stripper, you can, and you should be able to. So that's just an example to show you how feminism can be very blurred even amongst women. And the meaning can be very different depending on the woman or the feminist you're talking to. So I feel like women should speak up even amongst other women. So for example, my view, I consider myself a feminist because I believe in equality of the sexes, and I believe in women's autonomy and their right to choose who they want to be, what they do with their life, etc. And they shouldn't have to be under a man. But I'm not a feminist that believes men should be subordinate to women, or that they should be 100% equal on absolutely everything. I'm a feminist that recognizes the differences between men and women, and I feel like they should be celebrated and used to kind of enhance society to its fullest potential and enhance relationships, right? So I'm not the typical feminist because I guess I'm a feminist that believes that men should be leaders. I'm a feminist that believes that women should be protected and we should be, you know, under men's leadership in our families and our households. But it should be good leadership. It should be leaderships that we can trust and rely on. And I think we work best in a society where men are good leaders in the family structure and in relationships. Not necessarily in the workforce outside, but in their family structure and in their relationship. I think if you have a man who, you know, is compassionate and conscious of being a good leader, I think we work best as a society under that. But that's just my view, you know. But some people would say, oh, I'm not a feminist because how can I advocate for any form of male leadership in that way? So I feel like women should speak up more because there's different views amongst us, and that can help us to also, you know, address some of the problems with patriarchy when we start to hear each other better.
I agree with that.
Yeah. But like I said, you know, my view doesn't mean it needs to be translated into the workplace. It's more about how I feel like we should run our relationship and all of that. So we must remember as well that some men like the system the way it is, which makes it hard to change.
It makes it hard to change, You might ask, you know, why does it need to change?
Yeah, we've already established that.
It does need to change.
Yeah, in terms of society as the way it operates.
Fair.
Yeah, more fair. It reduces the chances of men abusing their power and all of that. So it does need to become more fair. But what you do in relationships,
dismantled, right? Because that's the question. How do we go about dismantling it?
Yeah, and what would that mean?
Yeah, well,
if
what does it look
society
like?
dismantles patriarchy for marriage and family and stuff?
Yeah, what does it look? What does society would look like? What does it look like?
I think we do need to dismantle the patriarchy in society. I just don't think we need to dismantle it in family and marriage. I just think they're really two very different institutions. And when I say society, I'm talking about the way we relate to each other as groups of people outside of our relationships in terms of like marriage and family structure. When I say family structure, I mean things like, the male lineage and things like that. I don't think that that's a problem. I think it's more about favoring men over women. And some people can say, well, the male lineage is favoring men over women. But I'm like, yeah, but the other option is to favor women over men. Yeah, and I'm like, that's, there's nothing wrong with that way either. But I feel like there's nothing wrong with the system of favoring men over women in terms of, when I say favoring men over women, I mean things like, the name going from the man to his children and that kind of stuff. Not in terms of women not meaning anything, but like the lineage being male. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I just think it's just, the way we operate. But I think it's more about making sure that things are done in a fair and equal way and in a compassionate way and understanding way. Yeah, I agree with that. But society in itself, you don't need to have all the leaders as men.
Yeah, I agree.
That's counterproductive because women are in the workforce too. If it was just men in the workforce, then fine, but women are there too. And, men should be able to take paternity leave if the same way women can and things like that. I think that matters because a man's role is also important in the family and each family should have the right to choose how they want to operate. Yeah, so I guess our summaries to the questions, is patriarchy bad in a relationship?
Nope.
Not necessarily. It's more about, is the relationship good? Is the relationship bad? Yeah. And does it work for the people that are in it?
Yeah, I agree with that. But we believe that in society, changes need to be made.
Yeah. But whether or not these changes are made, I don't think should necessarily impact your relationship.
I agree.
Because your relationship should operate in its own way and in a way that's conscious of the stereotypes and the norms of patriarchy and navigate through that in a way that it makes sense.
Yeah.
Where both people are happy.
Yeah, I agree with that, definitely.
Whether that's, being completely egalitarian. Yeah. So I guess the key takeaways are that the patriarchal system is deeply rooted in history and it's perpetuated by society and norms, etc. It is a system of power that privileges men and can oppress women in both clear and overt ways, but also in subtle ways. But then at the same time, it also oppresses men to some degree and it stifles men to some degree. So it's destructive not only to women, but to both genders and can limit your sense of expression and creativity.
That's true. So basically recognizing and challenging patriarchy helps create a more equitable and inclusive society.
And that just helps relationship because then if things are more equitable and inclusive, people are more free to kind of do what they need to do in their relationship in a way that suits them. Yeah, so discussing and understanding patriarchy is essential to creating lasting and meaningful change. And I feel like it's a good thing to talk about in a relationship in a way similar to what we suggested about roles and responsibilities and talking about that, but also because patriarchy is so societal, it's good to kind of get each other's views on that and talk about that in detail. And lastly, dismantling patriarchy requires a very complex approach, which includes collective education and advocacy and action. There's a lot of work that will go into dismantling patriarchy as a society, and that work can sometimes impact our relationships. So I think it's really about us understanding what our views are and what role we want to play in terms of society changing into a more egalitarian society if we feel like that is what's best. Some people might like society the way it is, like I was saying before.
Do let us know what you think.
Yeah, this is it's a bit of a deep topic, and I think we wanted to touch on it because as much as we talk about individual relationships and our relationship and tips for relationships, society impacts our relationships a lot, and the way society functions impacts it a lot. And the notion of toxic masculinity, misogyny, and all of that has come up a lot, and it comes up a lot in relationships. I mean, even the word narcissism being relating to men, you know, a lot of men are narcissists now, which is not necessarily, I'm not saying whether that's true or not, but, you know, the way we're viewing men as a society, because of the fact that we want to dismantle this oppressive system of patriarchy that we view as oppressive and the way it's being run, can have an effect on our relationship. So it's definitely things that we need to be aware of and talk about and understand as well. But yeah, patriarchy is not necessarily bad, but it can be, and it really does depend on how you navigate it in your relationship.
Yeah, I agree. And even in society, and I think each one of us can make a difference just by not conforming to the norm.
Yeah, if we don't think it's right. Yeah.
But in relationship, I mean, it's what works for you.
Yeah. I mean, how would we say, I mean, as the last thing that the last point for us to make, how do we deal with the fact that we are in a patriarchal society? How does that impact our relationship?
We communicate. We continue discussing it. This is why we share articles or clips and stuff that we see online about specific things, and we bring it to the table, we discuss it.
Yeah.
Just by discussing it, we cannot draw out each other's views on specific things.
Yeah.
That kind of tells us where we are. You know, if we're shifting towards if you're trying to get to that matriarchal, that will let me, I will know in advance and
yeah.
You know.
It's true. We talk about everything, and I think that is the key. We talk about communication all the time. I mean, our last episode of season 1 was communication is the key. We navigate it through communication, and by very much recognizing that our relationship is unique. We are individuals, and we do things the way that works best for us, regardless of societal norms, values, or stereotype. It's about how we want to live our lives. So we talk about these things, and then we decide what it means for us. Yeah.
And also, we also discuss how we navigate our way through the workplace, like, you know, knowing that, you know, it's a patriarchal society. We give each other advice, discuss certain things. We bring certain issues or certain concerns to the table. We also try and support each other through issues we may have had in the past. So I guess what we're saying is communication is the key here.
Yeah.
Continuous communication, being vulnerable, being open, being honest.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's it, guys.
So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
So that's it, guys. You've heard our views on the age-old issue of patriarchy. We've defined it, and we've discussed why it's such a big issue in today's society. We've also explored its effects on relationships and marriage, and our views on whether or not it needs to affect your marriage. We've given tips on how to navigate it as a couple, and ways to make a difference in your own way if you feel that it's necessary. We really hope you tune into the next episode, where we'll be talking about dating a different culture or race. So tune in, because that's going to be an interesting one. Hopefully a lot more lighthearted than this patriarchy one. But yeah, we're looking forward to that.
Definitely.
Don't forget to email us any of your questions, comments, or dilemmas at itt.thepodcast@gmail.com, or send us a DM on Instagram at ITT Podcast, all one word. Thank you for hanging out with us, and we'll speak to you on the next one. Bye.